The glistening chandeliers of the Grand Royale Hotel cast a warm, golden light over its spacious marble lobby. The hum of soft jazz played in the background, mingling with the murmur of guests arriving and departing. Among them was Darnell Hayes, a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 30s. His tailored navy blue suit complemented his confident stride, and the glint of his Rolex caught the attention of a few admiring onlookers as he approached the front desk. Darnell wasn't just a wealthy man, he was self-made. Born and raised in a rough neighborhood, he had clawed his way out through sheer determination and hard work, building a successful tech company that now boasted clients worldwide. This trip to New York was a brief reprieve from his usual schedule, a rare chance to relax and reflect before his next big venture. "Good afternoon," Darnell greeted, his deep voice calm yet commanding. "I have a reservation for tonight." The name's Darnell Hayes. Behind the counter stood Karen Billings, the hotel's manager. She was in her mid-40s, with a sharp bob haircut and a demeanor that reeked of entitlement. Karen had a reputation among the staff for being strict, often to the point of being unreasonable, but her behavior always seemed to escalate when dealing with certain guests. And Darnell, with his dark skin and effortless charisma, seemed to ignite something unpleasant in her from the moment she laid eyes on him. Karen's lips tightened as she glanced at her computer screen. "I'm sorry, but I don't see a reservation under that name," she said coldly, barely looking up. Darnell frowned slightly, pulling out his phone. "I received a confirmation email just yesterday. Would you like me to show it to you?" Karen sighed dramatically, her tone dripping with condescension. "Sure, but it won't change the fact that we're fully booked for the weekend. Perhaps you should try somewhere else." Darnell narrowed his eyes but remained composed. "I understand. Let me just double-check." As Darnell scrolled through his emails, Karen leaned closer, her voice dropping to a mocking whisper. "You know, sir, this is a luxury establishment. Maybe you'd feel more comfortable at one of those motels down the street." Darnell froze mid-scroll, his jaw tightening. He met her gaze, his brown eyes blazing with restrained anger. "Excuse me." Karen smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just saying, we have a certain standard here at the Grand Royale. Not everyone fits in." A hush fell over the nearby guests and staff as they began to notice the growing tension. Darnell straightened his posture, towering over Karen's smug expression. "I've stayed at this hotel multiple times," he said, his voice steady but firm. "And not once have I encountered such unprofessional behavior. Perhaps you'd like to explain why my confirmation email says my room is ready, but you're claiming it isn't?" Karen's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, her tone sharp. "Look, I don't know how you got that email, but we don't have a room for you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other guests to attend to." Darnell took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm despite the fury bubbling inside him. "I'd like to speak to your superior." Karen chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I am the superior, Mr. Hayes. I'm the manager here, and I make the decisions." Before Darnell could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" A tall man in a hotel uniform approached, his name tag identifying him as James, the assistant manager. He had been watching the exchange from a distance, his expression growing more concerned by the second. "Yes," Darnell said, his tone sharp. "I have a confirmed reservation, but Ms. Billings here seems determined to deny me service." James glanced at Karen, who folded her arms and raised an eyebrow, daring him to challenge her. "I'll look into it," he said quickly, stepping behind the counter to access the computer. Karen's face hardened. "James, I've already checked. There's nothing for him." James ignored her, typing rapidly. After a moment, he looked up, his face pale. "Actually, Mr. Hayes does have a reservation. It's for one of our executive suites." The crowd around them stirred, murmuring in surprise. Karen's face flushed, but she quickly regained her composure. "Well, There must have been a mix-up, she said, her voice tight. But like I said, we're fully booked, so. No, we're not, James interrupted firmly. There are at least 3 suites available right now. Darnell crossed his arms, fixing Karen with a steely glare. Care to explain why you lied to me? Karen stammered, searching for an excuse, but before she could respond, a loud crash echoed through the lobby. Everyone turned toward the entrance, where a masked figure had just burst through the glass doors, brandishing a gun. The room erupted into chaos as guests screamed and ducked for cover. Everyone on the ground, the intruder barked, waving the weapon wildly. Nobody move. Darnell instinctively shielded a nearby child as people scrambled to comply. Karen froze, her face a mask of terror, while James attempted to reach for his phone without being noticed. The gunman's eyes scanned the room, landing on Darnell. You. Suit guy. Empty your pockets. Darnell raised his hands slowly, his mind racing. Take whatever you want. Just don't hurt anyone. As he reached for his wallet, he noticed something strange. The gunman's hand was trembling. This wasn't a hardened criminal. It was someone desperate, and probably scared out of their mind. Karen, however, seemed to miss the nuance. Do something, she hissed at Darnell, as if it were his responsibility to save her. Darnell shot her a look of disbelief but didn't have time to respond. The gunman turned his attention to Karen, who had begun muttering prayers under her breath. Shut up, he yelled, pointing the gun at her. I said nobody move. The tension in the room was suffocating, every second dragging on like an eternity. Darnell's mind raced as he weighed his options. He wasn't a hero, but he couldn't stand by and let innocent people get hurt. Suddenly, the gunman's focus shifted to a security guard creeping toward him from the side. Stop right there, he shouted, spinning toward the guard. It was the moment Darnell had been waiting for. Seizing the opportunity, he lunged at the gunman, grabbing his arm and forcing the weapon upward. A shot rang out, shattering a chandelier, but Darnell held on, wrestling the gunman to the ground as the crowd scattered. The fight was chaotic, a blur of fists and shouts, but Darnell's determination never wavered. Finally, with the help of James and the security guard, he managed to disarm the intruder and pin him down until the police arrived. As the officers led the gunman away, the room erupted into applause. The aftermath of Darnell the chaos still lingered in the air his as heart Darnell still pounding as he turned back to Karen, brushing off the dust like from the scuffle. I think I'll take that sweet now, but outwardly, he said calmly, he exuded the same composed sarcasm he had shown since the beginning of this absurd ordeal. Respond, but no words came out. On the other hand, stood frozen behind the counter, her pale face betraying the whirlwind of emotions she was struggling to process. The guests slowly began to rise from their crouched positions, their murmurs growing louder. Some approached Darnell to thank him for his bravery, while others picked up their belongings, eager to leave and recount the harrowing experience to friends and family. James, the assistant manager, approached Darnell with a mixture of gratitude and concern. Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. That was incredibly brave. Are you okay? Darnell nodded curtly. I'm fine. Is everyone else okay? James glanced around the room, his eyes scanning the shaken crowd. It seems so. Thanks to you. Karen, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally found her voice. This is unacceptable, she exclaimed, her voice shrill. How could this happen in our hotel? Where was security? James shot her a pointed look. We should be grateful no one was seriously hurt, Karen. And maybe you should show some gratitude to Mr. Hayes here instead of blaming everyone else. Karen bristled, her lips tightening into a thin line. She clearly wasn't used to being called out, least of all by her subordinate. Ignoring James, she turned to Darnell with a forced smile. Well, I suppose I owe you a thank you, she said, though her tone was anything but sincere. That was heroic. Darnell raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by her sudden shift in demeanor. "Save it," he said coolly. "If you had just done your job instead of trying to humiliate me, we wouldn't even be having this conversation." Karen's cheeks flushed with anger and embarrassment, but before she could respond, 2 police officers entered the lobby, their presence immediately commanding attention. "Who's in charge here?" one of them asked, a tall woman with a no-nonsense attitude. Karen stepped forward, eager to reclaim her authority. "I'm the manager," she announced, her tone regaining some of its usual sharpness. The officer nodded. "We need statements from everyone involved, especially the man who subdued the suspect." Karen's face faltered for a moment before she gestured towards Darnell. "That would be him," she said, her voice tight. Darnell sighed, already feeling the weight of what was bound to be a long evening. "I'll do whatever you need," he said to the officer. The next hour was a blur of questions, note-taking, and recounting the events from multiple perspectives. The officers were thorough but professional, and by the end of it, Darnell was more than ready to retreat to the comfort of his room. As the police wrapped up their investigation and began to leave, James approached Darnell again, holding a keycard. "Here's your suite," James said, offering the card with an apologetic smile. "We've upgraded you to our presidential suite for the inconvenience. I can't begin to express how sorry I am for everything you've experienced tonight." Darnell took the keycard but didn't return the smile. "I appreciate it, James," he said. "But the issue here isn't just the inconvenience. It's the way I was treated from the moment I walked in." James nodded solemnly. "I understand, sir. And I promise you, this will be addressed." Karen, who had been lurking nearby, overheard the exchange and stepped forward. "I think we've all had a long night," she said, her tone clipped. "Perhaps we can discuss this tomorrow, Mr. Hayes." Darnell's eyes narrowed. "Tomorrow," he repeated. "You think this is something that can just wait until tomorrow?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, but Darnell raised a hand, cutting her off. "Let me make something clear," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "I'm not just some random guy walking in off the street. I'm a paying customer, and I deserve the same respect as anyone else who walks through those doors. The way you treated me tonight was unacceptable, and I'm not letting it slide." The tension between them was palpable, and the surrounding guests and staff watched the confrontation with bated breath. Karen, clearly uncomfortable, tried to maintain her composure, but it was clear she was rattled. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her voice faltering slightly, "I assure you, I didn't mean to." "Spare me the excuses," Darnell interrupted. "You knew exactly what you were doing. And trust me, you'll be held accountable for it." Karen's face turned an even deeper shade of red, but she said nothing. Darnell turned back to James. "Thank you for your professionalism," he said, his tone softening slightly. "I'll be in my room if you need anything else." With that, he walked away, leaving Karen to stew in her humiliation. The presidential suite was as luxurious as Darnell had expected, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. But despite the opulent surroundings, he couldn't shake the lingering frustration from earlier. He poured himself a glass of water and sat down on the plush sofa, replaying the events of the evening in his mind. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his assistant, Mariah. "Hope your stay is going well, boss. Let me know if you need me to handle anything on my end." Darnell stared at the message for a moment before typing a response. "It's been eventful. I'll fill you in tomorrow." As he set his phone down, he couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. He had no doubt that Karen would try to sweep everything under the rug, but he wasn't about to let that happen. Not this time. For now, though, he needed rest. He leaned back against the sofa, letting the tension in his body slowly dissipate as he gazed out at the glittering lights of the city. The morning light spilled through the massive windows of the presidential suite, bathing the room in a warm glow. Darnell woke early, his mind still clouded with thoughts of the previous night's events. Though he had tried to rest, the combination of Karen's blatant discrimination and the chaotic confrontation with the gunman left him restless. He decided today would not pass without action. After showering and dressing in a crisp gray suit, Darnell called Mariah, his assistant, to discuss his plans. "Good morning, boss," she greeted cheerfully. "How's the trip so far?" "Good morning, Mariah," Darnell replied, his tone calm but firm. "I need you to prepare a press release. Something big went down here last night, and I'm not letting it slide." Mariah's tone shifted instantly. "What happened?" Darnell recounted the events in detail, Karen's disrespectful behavior, the chaos in the lobby, and the aftermath. By the time he finished, Mariah was fuming. "Unbelievable," she said. "Do you want me to contact the hotel's corporate office too?" "Not yet," Darnell said. "I want to give them a chance to handle this internally first. But if they fail to do so, then we escalate." "Understood," Mariah replied. "I'll get started on the release. Keep me updated." After ending the call, Darnell headed to the lobby. He wasn't just here to confront Karen again, he wanted to observe the staff and guests in their natural rhythm, to see if his experience was an isolated incident or part of a larger issue. The lobby buzzed with activity. Guests checked in and out, staff bustled about, and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the cafe. It seemed like any other morning at a luxury hotel, but Darnell's presence caused heads to turn. He overheard whispers as he walked past. "Isn't that the guy from last night? He's the one who stopped the gunman, right?" "Yeah, but did you hear about what the manager said to him?" Darnell ignored the murmurs, making his way to the front desk. James was there, looking visibly relieved to see him. "Mr. Hayes," James greeted, offering a warm smile. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." "As well as I could, given the circumstances," Darnell replied. "Has Karen come in yet?" James hesitated, glancing around. "She's in her office. I think she's regrouping after last night." Darnell chuckled dryly. "Regrouping? That's an interesting way to put it." James lowered his voice. "If you're planning to speak with her, I just want you to know that not all of us support how she handled things. Many of us have had issues with her behavior, but she's been with the company for years and has friends in high places." Darnell nodded thoughtfully. "Thanks for the insight, James. I appreciate your honesty." With that, Darnell headed to Karen's office. He knocked firmly, waiting for the inevitable awkwardness. "Come in," Karen's voice called, sounding more subdued than usual. Darnell pushed the door open and stepped inside. Karen sat behind her desk, her usual air of authority replaced by a visible tension. "Mr. Hayes," she said, forcing a tight smile. "What can I do for you?" Darnell closed the door behind him and took a seat across from her. "I wanted to discuss what happened last night," he began, his tone calm but direct. Karen sighed, her hands clasping nervously. "I've already informed corporate about the incident," she said. "And I've sent an apology email to all the guests who were inconvenienced." "That's a start," Darnell replied. "But I'm not here about the gunman. I'm here about how you treated me before that chaos unfolded." Karen's face hardened slightly. "I've explained that there was a mix-up with your reservation." "Don't insult my intelligence," Darnell interrupted, his voice firm. "We both know that wasn't the issue. You saw me, made an assumption about me, and decided to treat me as less than. I want to know why." Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Mr. Hayes, I assure you, that wasn't my intention." "Your actions say otherwise," Darnell shot back. "And let's not forget the comment about motels. That wasn't an accident, that was deliberate." Karen's expression faltered, and for a moment, she looked genuinely remorseful. But just as quickly, her defensive posture returned. "Look," she said, her voice tight. "I may have been mistaken in how I handled the situation. But I didn't mean any harm." Darnell leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Mistaken? You didn't just make a mistake, Karen. You tried to humiliate me. And if James hadn't intervened, you would have gotten away with it." Karen's face flushed, and for a moment, she looked like she might argue. But something in Darnell's unwavering gaze stopped her. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally, her tone weary. "I want accountability," Darnell said. "Not just for me, but for anyone else you might have treated this way. And I want to make sure it doesn't happen again." Karen nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping. "I understand," she said quietly. As Darnell stood to leave, he added, "And Karen, this isn't just about you. It's about the culture you've helped create here. Fix it, or I'll make sure someone else does." The rest of the day passed relatively smoothly, though the tension in the air was palpable. Darnell spent much of his time in the suite, catching up on work and fielding calls for Mariah, who had already drafted a powerful press release in case the situation escalated further. In the evening, as Darnell sat down for dinner in the hotel's upscale restaurant, he noticed James approaching his table. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" James asked. "Not at all," Darnell replied. James took a seat, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning," he began. "And I want you to know, I'm with you. If you decide to take this further, you won't be alone." Darnell smiled slightly. "I appreciate that, James. But let's see how corporate handles this first." James nodded, though he still seemed uneasy. "Just be careful. Karen has a lot of connections, and she's not the type to go down without a fight." "I'm not worried about Karen," Darnell said confidently. "I've dealt with worse." As James left the table, Darnell couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about standing up to the systemic biases that people like Karen perpetuated. But as he sipped his wine, he couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. For us to continue, comment below where you were watching from and like this story. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on stories. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the city in hues of orange and purple, Darnell was seated in his suite, staring at his laptop. His mind buzzed with ideas and strategies for handling the situation. He knew that going public was an option, but he wanted to ensure he exhausted every internal measure first. The situation wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was a test of the hotel chain's commitment to equity and respect. Just as he finished reviewing the draft press release Mariah had sent, his phone buzzed. It was James. "Mr. Hayes, I think you need to come down to the lobby," James said, his voice tight with urgency. "What's going on?" "It's Karen. She's escalating things." Darnell's jaw tightened. "I'll be right there." When Darnell stepped into the lobby, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen stood at the center, her arms crossed and her face flushed with anger. Surrounding her were a handful of staff members and even some guests who had stopped to watch the commotion. "I will not be undermined in my own hotel," Karen was shouting, her voice echoing off the marble floors. "What's this about?" Darnell asked, his calm tone slicing through the chaos. Karen spun around to face him, her eyes blazing. "This is about you undermining my authority," she snapped. "I don't know who you think you are, but you've caused nothing but problems since you walked through those doors." Darnell folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "All I've done is hold you accountable for your actions," he said. "If that's a problem for you, perhaps you're in the wrong line of work." Karen's face turned red, and for a moment, it seemed like she might explode. Instead, she turned to the crowd that had gathered. "Let me tell you all something," she began, her voice dripping with venom. "This man walks in here, demands special treatment, disrupts my staff, and now he's trying to ruin my career." The murmurs grew louder, and Darnell could feel the weight of the stares on him. He took a deep breath, refusing to let her bait him. "You're deflecting," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't about me disrupting anything. It's about you treating me, and likely others, unfairly because of your own biases. Own up to it." Karen scoffed. "Biases? Don't be ridiculous. I've worked in this industry for over 20 years, and I've treated every guest with the same level of professionalism." Darnell raised an eyebrow. "Professionalism? Is that what you call insinuating that I belong in a motel? Because I'm pretty sure most people would call that discrimination." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, James stepped forward. "Karen," James said, his tone firm but measured. "Maybe it's time you took a step back and let corporate handle this. You're not helping yourself or the hotel right now." Karen turned on him, her eyes narrowing. "You're siding with him? After everything I've done for this place?" "I'm siding with what's right," James replied evenly. "And what's right is addressing the legitimate concerns Mr. Hayes has raised." Karen's face twisted with fury, but before she could lash out again, a voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" All heads turned to see a middle-aged man in a tailored suit walking into the lobby. His presence commanded attention, and Karen's demeanor shifted instantly. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice suddenly sweet. "I didn't realize you were coming." "I wasn't planning to," the man replied, his sharp gaze scanning the room. "But I received some troubling reports last night, and I thought it best to address them in person." Mr. Grayson, the regional director for the hotel chain, turned to Darnell. "Mr. Hayes, I presume?" Darnell nodded. "That's correct." "I'd like to speak with you privately," Mr. Grayson said, gesturing towards a nearby conference room. Darnell followed him, aware of the curious stares trailing behind them. As the door closed behind them, Mr. Grayson gestured for Darnell to sit. "I want to start by apologizing for what you've experienced," Mr. Grayson said. "I've reviewed the preliminary reports, and I have to say, I'm deeply concerned about the behavior of our staff, particularly Ms. Peterson." Darnell leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but wary. "I appreciate the apology, but actions speak louder than words." "Agreed," Mr. Grayson said. "Which is why I'm here to ensure this is handled appropriately. I'd like to hear your account of what happened, in your own words." Darnell recounted the events once again, from Karen's initial refusal to book his room to the chaos with the gunman and the aftermath. Mr. Grayson listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When Darnell finished, Mr. Grayson leaned forward. "I want to assure you, Mr. Hayes, that this is not representative of our brand's values. We will be conducting a thorough investigation, and if necessary, appropriate disciplinary action will be taken." "That's a good start," Darnell said. "But I also want to see systemic changes. This isn't just about one bad manager, it's about ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else." Mr. Grayson nodded. "You have my word. We'll be implementing additional training for all staff, starting with this location. And as for Ms. Peterson, well, let's just say her days as manager here may be numbered." Darnell didn't respond immediately, studying Mr. Grayson carefully. While the man seemed sincere, Darnell knew talk was cheap. Only time would reveal whether his promises would translate into action. "Thank you," Darnell said finally. "I'll be watching closely to see how this unfolds." As the meeting concluded, Darnell left the conference room feeling cautiously optimistic. But the battle wasn't over yet. Karen's behavior had exposed a deeper issue, and Darnell was determined to see it through to the end. Darnell stepped out of the conference room, his shoulders squared and his resolve firm. The interaction with Mr. Grayson had been a step in the right direction, but he knew better than to celebrate prematurely. As he crossed the lobby, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes following him, some curious, others judgmental. Karen was nowhere to be seen, but her absence didn't ease the tension that lingered in the air. James approached him with a cautious expression. "How'd it go?" James asked, his voice low. Darnell nodded. "Grayson seems sincere, but we'll see if his actions back up his words." James sighed, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Karen to appear at any moment. "She's holed up in her office," he muttered. "I think she knows the walls are closing in." Darnell allowed himself a small smile. "Good. Maybe it's time she faced some accountability." As they spoke, a commotion erupted at the front desk. A guest was shouting, demanding to speak with the manager. Darnell and James exchanged a glance before moving toward the source of the noise. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the receptionist stammered, her face pale. "Ms. Peterson isn't available at the moment. Can I assist you with something?" The guest, a well-dressed woman in her 40s, slammed her hand on the counter. "Not available. After the way she treated me last night, she better make herself available." Darnell recognized the woman as one of the guests who had been in the lobby during the gunman's attack. He stepped forward, his tone calm but authoritative. "Excuse me, ma'am. I couldn't help but overhear." "Are you referring to the manager, Karen Peterson?" The woman turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "And who are you?" "My name is Darnell Hayes," he replied. "I had my own run-in with Ms. Peterson last night. It seems we may have shared a similar experience." The woman crossed her arms, her expression softening slightly. "She humiliated me in front of my family," she said. "We were trying to book a suite, and she had the nerve to insinuate that we couldn't afford it. Can you believe that?" "I can," Darnell said grimly. "Unfortunately, it seems to be a pattern with her." The woman's eyes widened. "You too? This is unacceptable. Someone needs to do something about her." "We're working on it," Darnell assured her. "The regional director is here, and he's aware of the situation. I'd recommend sharing your experience with him as well." The woman nodded, her anger giving way to determination. "I'll do that. Thank you." As she walked away, Darnell turned to James. "This isn't just about me anymore. Karen's behavior has clearly impacted others. If corporate doesn't take this seriously, I will." James nodded, his expression resolute. "You're not alone in this, Mr. Hayes. A lot of us here are ready for a change." Later that evening, Darnell sat in the hotel bar, nursing a glass of whiskey. The events of the past 24 hours had been exhausting, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was bigger than him. It was about challenging a system that allowed people like Karen to thrive. As he sipped his drink, he noticed a man approach the bar. The stranger was tall and broad-shouldered, with a sharp suit and an air of authority. "Mind if I join you?" the man asked, gesturing to the empty seat beside Darnell. "Be my guest," Darnell replied, gesturing for the bartender to bring another glass. The man sat down, introducing himself as Marcus Reed. "I'm with the corporate compliance team," Marcus explained. "Mr. Grayson asked me to come down and conduct an independent review of the situation." Darnell raised an eyebrow. "Corporate compliance? You don't waste any time, do you?" "We take these matters seriously," Marcus said, his tone firm. "I've already spoken to several staff members, and the picture they're painting of Ms. Peterson isn't a flattering one." Darnell leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus carefully. "And what happens if your review confirms what we already know?" "Then Ms. Peterson will face disciplinary action," Marcus replied. "Up to and including termination." "Good," Darnell said. "But this isn't just about Karen. It's about ensuring the entire culture here changes. Otherwise, we're just putting a band-aid on a bullet wound." Marcus nodded. "I agree. And that's why I'd like to hear your suggestions for systemic changes we can implement. Your perspective could be invaluable. Darnell appreciated the gesture but remained cautious. He'd heard promises like this before, only to see them fizzle out when the spotlight dimmed. I'll think about it, he said finally. But let's focus on the immediate issue first. Fair enough, Marcus said, raising his glass. To accountability. To change, Darnell countered, clinking his glass against Marcus's. The next morning, Darnell was up early, determined to stay one step ahead of the unfolding drama. He had just finished a call with Mariah when his phone buzzed with a text from James. You need to see this. Come to the lobby ASAP, ***. Darnell wasted no time, grabbing his jacket and heading downstairs. When he arrived, he found the lobby in an uproar. Karen was standing near the front desk, her face pale and her hands trembling as she argued with Mr. Grayson and Marcus. This is a witch hunt. Karen was shouting. You're taking the word of a few disgruntled guests and staff over someone who's dedicated years to this company. This isn't a witch hunt, Karen, Marcus said, his tone icy. It's an investigation. And the evidence we've gathered so far is damning. Karen's eyes darted around the lobby, landing on Darnell. This is your fault, she hissed, pointing a finger at him. You waltzed in here and turned everyone against me. Darnell met her gaze calmly. No, Karen. You did that all on your own. The crowd that had gathered murmured in agreement, and for the first time, Karen seemed to realize just how isolated she was. You can't do this to me, she said, her voice cracking. I've given everything to this place. And that's precisely why this is so disappointing, Mr. Grayson said. You had the opportunity to lead by example, and instead, you chose to abuse your authority. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending the outcome of this investigation. Karen's face crumpled, and she stormed out of the lobby without another word. Darnell watched her go, a mixture of relief and anticipation coursing through him. This was a victory, but the fight wasn't over yet. The lobby settled into an uneasy quiet after Karen's abrupt departure. Staff exchanged nervous glances, whispering amongst themselves. Darnell stood near the front desk, his arms folded, observing the scene. While Karen's suspension was a step forward, he knew it wasn't the end of the story. The rot ran deeper than one manager's bad behavior. James approached, his expression a mix of relief and tension. She's finally gone, for now, he muttered, keeping his voice low. But knowing Karen, she's not going down without a fight. Darnell nodded. I don't expect her to, he replied. But it's not about her anymore. This is about the system that let her thrive in the first place. James glanced toward the elevator, where Mr. Grayson and Marcus had just disappeared after Karen's exit. What's your next move? Darnell smiled faintly. You'll see soon enough. Later that afternoon, Darnell decided it was time to use his platform. He scheduled a live stream from his suite, ensuring his followers knew to tune in. By now, word of his altercation with Karen had begun to spread on social media, thanks to several witnesses who had posted videos and tweets recounting the incident. As the live stream began, Darnell appeared on screen, his tone measured but firm. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to share a story with you, a personal experience that highlights the ongoing issues we face when it comes to bias and discrimination. It happened right here, in one of the most prestigious hotel chains in the country. He recounted the events of the past few days, from Karen's initial refusal to book his room to the gunman incident and the fallout that followed. He spoke candidly about the emotions he felt, anger, frustration, and determination, and called for systemic change within the hospitality industry. This isn't just about one bad manager, he said, looking directly into the camera. It's about a culture that allows people like her to wield power unchecked. It's about the silent complicity that enables these behaviors to persist. And it's about time we held these institutions accountable. The response was immediate. Comments flooded the stream, with viewers expressing outrage, support, and a shared desire for change. Hashtags like #AccountabilityMatters and #DarnellDeservesJustice began trending within hours. Meanwhile, downstairs in the hotel's conference room, Marcus and Mr. Grayson were conducting interviews with staff and guests. The accounts they heard painted a damning picture of Karen's tenure as manager. "She's been like this for years," one housekeeper confessed. "We're all just too scared to say anything because we need our jobs." Another staff member chimed in. "She's always had a bias against certain guests, especially black guests. She'd find excuses to deny them rooms or make their stay miserable." Mr. Grayson's expression grew darker with each testimony. "Why hasn't anyone reported her before?" he asked. The housekeeper hesitated, then said, "Because we didn't think anyone would listen. She's been here so long, and she knows how to cover her tracks." Marcus took diligent notes, his jaw tight. "Well, that ends now," he said. "Thank you for your honesty." By evening, the hotel was buzzing with activity. Journalists had caught wind of the story, and a few had stationed themselves outside the entrance, hoping for a statement from corporate or Darnell himself. Guests whispered in hallways, some taking sides, others simply curious about the unfolding drama. Darnell stepped into the lobby to grab a coffee, drawing immediate attention from several onlookers. A journalist approached him, microphone in hand. "Mr. Hayes, can we get a comment on the situation with Karen Peterson?" Darnell smiled politely but shook his head. "I appreciate your interest, but I'll reserve my comments for now. Stay tuned." As he turned to leave, he noticed a familiar face near the front desk, the woman from earlier, who had been humiliated by Karen while trying to book a suite. She caught his eye and approached him with a determined stride. "I took your advice," she said, her voice steady. "I spoke with Mr. Grayson. Told him everything that happened to me and my family." Darnell nodded. "Good. Every voice matters in this." The woman smiled faintly. "You're doing something important here. Don't stop." Her words bolstered Darnell's resolve. As night fell, Darnell received a text from Mariah. "This is gaining serious traction. Media outlets are picking it up. Want me to schedule some interviews for you? ****. Darnell replied quickly. "Let's hold off for now. I want to see how corporate handles this first. ***. He knew the spotlight could be a powerful tool, but it was also a double-edged sword. Public pressure could force the hotel to act swiftly, but it could also complicate his efforts to effect lasting change. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. He opened it to find Marcus standing there, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Hayes," Marcus said. "Do you have a moment? There's something you need to see." Curious, Darnell nodded and followed Marcus down the hallway. They entered a small conference room where Mr. Grayson was waiting, along with several staff members. On the table was a laptop displaying security footage from the lobby. "This footage was taken last night, shortly before Karen confronted you," Marcus explained. "We thought you might want to see it." The video showed Karen near the front desk, speaking with another staff member. Her body language was agitated, and her voice, though muffled, was unmistakably angry. "Who does he think he is?" Karen spat, her face twisted with disdain. "Strutting in here like he owns the place. I'll show him who's in charge." The footage paused, and Darnell's stomach churned. It was one thing to suspect her animosity was personal, it was another to see it confirmed so plainly. "This is just one piece of evidence," Marcus said. "But it's damning enough to warrant immediate action." Darnell took a deep breath, steadying himself. "So what happens now?" Mr. Grayson folded his hands on the table. "We're finalizing our report, but I can tell you this, Karen Peterson will no longer be employed by this company. While the news was satisfying, Darnell knew there was still more to be done. "What about the bigger picture?" he asked. "How do you plan to address the culture that allowed her behavior to go unchecked for so long?" Mr. Grayson nodded. "We're working on a plan, and we'd like your input. This could be an opportunity to set a new standard, not just for this hotel, but for the entire chain." Darnell considered his words carefully. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, but it was also a heavy responsibility. "I'll help," he said finally. "But only if you're serious about real change." "We are," Marcus assured him. The following morning, the hotel was a hive of activity. News vans lined the curb outside, reporters eager for a statement. Inside, staff members bustled about with nervous energy, the weight of Karen's suspension and the investigation heavy in the air. Darnell stood by the large windows in the lobby, watching the scene unfold. Despite the chaos, he felt a sense of clarity. The events of the past few days had solidified his mission, not just to seek justice for himself but to be a voice for others who had experienced similar treatment. Marcus approached him with a clipboard in hand. "We're about to make the announcement," he said. "Care to join us?" Darnell nodded, following Marcus to the small makeshift podium that had been set up in the lobby. A group of reporters and curious onlookers gathered, their attention fixed on the front of the room. Mr. Grayson stepped up to the podium first, clearing his throat. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Over the past few days, we've conducted a thorough investigation into the actions of one of our managers, Ms. Karen Peterson. Based on the evidence we've gathered, we've determined that her behavior was unacceptable and in direct violation of our company's values. Effective immediately, Ms. Peterson is no longer employed by this organization." A murmur spread through the crowd, cameras flashing as reporters scrambled to capture the moment. "But this situation has highlighted a larger issue," Mr. Grayson continued. "We recognize that systemic problems within our culture allowed these behaviors to go unchecked for far too long. We are committed to making meaningful changes, starting with mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees, a revamped reporting system for complaints, and the creation of an independent oversight committee." He stepped aside, gesturing for Darnell to join him at the podium. Darnell adjusted the microphone, his voice steady as he began to speak. "What happened here is not unique to this hotel or even this industry. It's a reflection of a much larger problem that affects countless people every day. But change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without accountability. Today is a step in the right direction, but it's only the beginning." The crowd erupted into applause, and Darnell stepped back, his gaze sweeping the room. He could see James standing near the back, nodding in approval, and the woman from earlier, smiling in support. Later that afternoon, Darnell packed his bags, preparing to leave the hotel. Though his stay had been far from relaxing, it had been transformative in ways he hadn't anticipated. As he loaded his suitcase into his car, Marcus approached him in the parking lot. "I wanted to thank you again," Marcus said. "Your willingness to speak up made all the difference." Darnell shook his hand. "Just make sure the changes stick," he replied. Marcus nodded. "We will." Driving away from the hotel, Darnell couldn't help but reflect on the journey. What had started as a frustrating encounter with a power-hungry manager had evolved into something much bigger, a movement for accountability, fairness, and change. His phone buzzed with a notification, and he glanced at the screen to see a message from Mariah. "You're trending again. People are calling you the justice advocate." Darnell chuckled, shaking his head. He didn't need titles or accolades. All he cared about was making a difference, and he wasn't done yet. As he drove toward the horizon, a sense of purpose filled him. This was only the beginning.